Hello and welcome to today's podcast. I'm Susan Guthrie, your host, and today I am joined by a friend and colleague from New York. Her name is Carolyn Kalos, and she is a family law attorney in New York City. She's a mediator, and importantly, she is a parent coordinator. And that is what we're going to be talking about today. This is a hot topic in family law. And Carolyn, I'm so happy you could join me for what's going to be, people, a very special double episode.
Thank you for having me, Susan. I'm really excited to be here.
I have wanted to do an episode on parent coordination for quite some time now, but I wanted to be sure to find the right person to talk about this because parent coordination is actually something that's been around for a while, but it seems to be, as I said earlier, a hot topic lately. More and more often I'm hearing it from more and more professionals. I'm hearing that they're offering parent coordination services. And I think maybe COVID had something to do with the rise, but it's definitely something that I want parents and co-parents to really understand, and my professionals out there, because we also have a large number of professionals who listen. You've been a parent coordinator and are currently doing parent coordination work in New York. How long have you been doing parent coordination?
So I've been in private practice for about a year and a half. I left the court system in July of 2020, mid-pandemic.
Okay, so right at that time when the entire world went on a computer, you opened your practice, and I know you've been getting quite a bit of parent coordination client work lately. Why do you think it's rising so much these days?
So COVID was not good for the New York City court system. New York City is a large place. The courts are very, very busy. I was once told that the Brooklyn Family Court is the busiest courthouse in the country, second only to the Bronx Family Court. I think one has the most cases and one has the most number of filings. I'm not sure how they figured that out. So they were already very overburdened to begin with, and COVID, everything went on hold for a while, and they're still coming out of the backlog. So with the courts being overburdened, everybody is looking for a way to help families that doesn't involve the court system. So and with COVID also, families are having more conflicts. There were a ton of conflicts related to COVID. I could list them now.
Yeah. Well, we've done a couple episodes on that. We can just say to vaccinate or not vaccinate. Let's start with, right? We don't need to go into
that is one of them.
Yes.
And there are a lot of other conflicts within families. So the court systems were overloaded to begin with, lots and lots of family conflicts, lots of people who were in lockdown together. It wasn't an easy time for people to get along and to parent their children. So people are turning to parenting coordination to lessen the burdens on the court system. So attorneys are referring more cases, judges are referring more cases, anything to ease the burden on the court system. And so I guess those of us who are doing parenting coordination are seeing rises all over.
Yeah, I mean, it's really quite a trend lately. I'm hearing it from all of the professionals I speak to. And I think it's a very good point that you make, because we've seen sort of the same rise of mediation for divorce and for family conflict, huge rise in people reaching out for mediation services. Because of COVID, courts were closed, no other recourse. In fact, you also do family mediation through your firm, Family Friendly Mediation in New York as well, right?
Yes, I do. And all parenting coordinators have to be mediators. We use our mediation skills a lot in trying to reach consensus in parenting coordination. So they go hand in hand. But yes, I've seen a rise in both mediation and in parenting coordination, just because judges just don't have the time to deal with all of the small decisions. They're handling some of the bigger cases or things that just can't be resolved by mediation or parenting coordination. So for the most part, we've seen that judges are very grateful when parenting coordinators can take some of the burden away from them.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's actually really important for people to understand the courts, as you said, were overburdened, and it's not just New York City. Yes. I mean, I practiced in New York. New York is crazy, the courts there, but California, where I also practice, Connecticut, and pretty much every state in the country, they were overburdened before COVID. I frankly don't think they're ever going to catch up, to the point where you can go into court and get your case handled in an expeditious fashion the way that you would want to. You weren't getting that done before COVID. You aren't going to get that done after COVID. So it's actually a beneficial thing that awareness has been raised for things like mediation and parent coordination. But although the awareness is there, I don't know that of the availability of parent coordination. I don't know that everyone understands what parent coordination is. So let's start there. What is PC, parent coordination?
So parent coordination, it can be a lot of different things, but the concept is that it's a hybrid alternative dispute resolution technique. So parenting coordinators some have mental health backgrounds, some have legal backgrounds, but the most important thing is to have some sort of training and experience in dealing with high conflict families, and whether it's through your mental health background or a legal background. I have a background in law. I was an attorney for the child for over 20 years in the family court system. So for me, it was a natural progression to go into parenting coordination. Many of my colleagues are mental health professionals who deal with families as, they do therapy, family therapy, therapy for kids, and they are also parenting coordinators. And the goal of parenting coordination is to help teach parents how to communicate better, how to make parenting decisions together, how to lessen the overall conflict in the families, keep them out of court and focused on their families, and how to sort of get by on their own without having to rely on the court system. We handle people this is another thing that's on the rise, is starting to work with families pre-divorce. That was not as much the case when parenting coordination first was established. It's more and more happening that we get families before their separation or settlement agreement is drafted.
That's actually wonderful, because they can start, it's hard when families will go through the divorce process, which can be conflictual, especially if there is high conflict. And that kind of almost cements some of the negative behaviors and negative communication patterns, and just conflictual, conflict is a cycle. I argue with you, you argue with me, and that goes back and forth. So the idea of starting to work with parents in a way to help them create a better co-parenting relationship during the relationship makes a lot of sense. But you are, as you said, working with cases where there's conflict. You don't get a parent coordinator involved when you have parents who are generally able to co-parent effectively. This is for cases where people need some help.
Correct. So I have started putting in a lot of my mediation agreements. We used to put in that you would return to mediation if you can't agree on certain things. We're tending to put more that you would work with a parenting coordinator for certain decisions. If you can't decide, for example, how to expand your parenting time in the summer as the children get older, or if you can't decide what middle school a child should go to, you'll work with a parenting coordinator, which is sort of a less intense, less invasive way to allow your parenting agreement to grow with your family. Rather than going back to mediation and modifying your agreement, you just work with a parenting coordinator to make small changes in your parenting agreement or in your family dynamic as you move along.
So that's a great tip, right? For those people who are going through divorce right now, who want to be sure they have an effective way to deal with issues that come up around their parenting plan or parenting decisions. You can put language right in your agreement that you will refer those matters to a parent coordinator. Now, do people usually name a parent coordinator right in the agreement?
So what I've been doing a lot is I work with a nonprofit called Family Kind, and they work with families regardless of ability to pay. And I'm on their board, and I'm one of their consultants for mediation and parenting coordination. And I often, suggest that people put Family Kind in. Then when something happens, because a lot of parenting coordinators are not available, right? And I've been put in parenting coordination contracts, and I will get a call, for example, 2 days before Thanksgiving, we have a crisis and you're our parenting coordinator. I've never met these people. I don't know who they are. So by putting Family Kind in my agreements, they know to call Family Kind, and there is a screening process, and the person who does intake can match them with an appropriate parenting coordinator who's available, which is important.
Helps.
If I'm their parenting coordinator, I might not be taking new clients at that point. And sometimes it's, I think, important to have a parenting coordinator with a mental health background. And sometimes I think it's important to have a parenting coordinator with a legal background. So the person doing the screening at Family Kind can match them with somebody both available and appropriate for their case. You can also, some families like to do this, pick their parenting coordinator at that point. And I've been interviewed by families who are looking to put me in their contract, in their agreement, but they interview me and it would be for some forward, sometime in the future when their first, disagreement
Arises.
Arises. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think that's really interesting that people would put in their agreement that they want to use the parent coordinator to even perhaps name you without having already spoken to you or without having interviewed you. If people are thinking about using a parent coordinator, do you recommend that they interview perhaps a few different PCs before putting one in their agreement?
I do. And I tell people that, and I like it when they interview me because it's a very intense and personal experience, and they should feel comfortable with me if they're going to use me. And especially my background is in law, and I do have a lot of experience in conflict and family dynamics, and even in the mental health arena, just because I did child abuse and neglect for many years in family court, and there's a lot of mental illness and other areas that end up in parenting coordination. But I'm not a mental health clinician, and sometimes I have said to people, I think in your case you should find someone with a mental health background. So I do think it's important that people interview more than one person and pick someone that they both feel comfortable with, because sometimes it's a long-term relationship, and they should feel comfortable with me. And also they, I should know who they are, right? So that It doesn't happen. What happened the last time, luckily I was available. There was a 2 day before Thanksgiving crisis, and I was able to navigate it and get this kid on a plane to where he needed to be and navigate when he left and everything. But it was not ideal.
No, well, and I think it's difficult for everyone, right? And then when you add that additional pressure of meeting with a stranger for an emergency topic 2 days before the holiday, you're just adding additional pressure to it. And I think it's an important thing to look back to what you said about your experience, because you do have unique experience. I know a lot of family law attorneys, but your experience as an attorney for the children is really what I think sets you apart, makes you very special in the world of parent coordination, because you do have so much experience of working with children, working in families that have some level of dysfunction or conflict, and really looking to protect the children, which ultimately I think is what all parents do want. So when someone is looking for a parent coordinator, I don't even know, where do you tell people to go to find a parent coordinator?
Most of the matrimonial attorneys keep lists, judges keep lists, and sometimes parents, like in parenting groups, mom to mom or dad to dad, can recommend people. Also, I think I mentioned earlier that Family Kind, an organization that I am part of, and it's a wonderful organization. They have a list of parenting coordinators, and they're very careful in who they work with, and work only with people that they know very well. So, and it's important not only to get recommendations, but you have to have a chemistry, right? You have to have a connection with somebody, because there are going to be times when each parent disagrees with, let's say, me, dislikes me, feels like I'm favoring the other person, right? And if there's not some, at least, investment or buy-in to the initial choice, you're going to be less likely to want to stay invested in working with me, right? And I try to explain to people early on that there will be times when you are not going to like a decision that I make or a recommendation that I make. And it's hopefully over time, you'll see that it goes both ways, and that I'm truly only looking at what's best for your kids. It's not a personal to a mom, a dad, a mom. It's just about the children.
Right. And that's a really important thing for people to understand. And so, one quick takeaway for people who are listening is, if you are going to put a clause about parent coordination in your agreement, I think both of us wholeheartedly support that, but don't just knee jerk put in, we will refer this to a parent coordinator with, or maybe do put that in rather than specifying someone that maybe someone has recommended. If you haven't checked that person out or interviewed that person, it's very likely if a parent coordinator clause is going in your agreement, you should have some idea and maybe do some interviewing ahead of time, so that when you need this person, you have them available.
And not to also make this more complicated, but if you're going to put a name in and you've spoken to that, not everybody has availability in their caseloads. My caseload is getting very high. These are really, really intense, difficult cases. So, most of us, sort of put a limit on what percentage of our caseloads are PC cases, what percentage are mediation cases. For the therapists, what percentage are PC and what percentage are, family therapy or individual therapy. So, you may want to have a backup choice if you're not going through like Family Kind as an organization. If you want to pick somebody that you've spoken to already, you may want to have a backup choice.
Our first choice would be so-and-so. In the event so-and-so is unable to act as our parent coordinator, we select party B. Because I do think that's significant. And this comes up anytime you put, we're going to refer a matter to some outside professional in your agreement. If you don't have a pre-selected person, you are creating sort of this gray area of, well, we've agreed we're going to pick someone, but we can't agree on who to pick. And when it comes to parent coordination, again, as we've talked about, a lot of those issues are like of the moment issues where help is needed. That parent coordination is needed in that moment, and you don't have time for a lot of back and forth arguing over who you're going to select.
Right. It may be that you need to register a child for school right away, or a child needs mental health treatment right away, or braces right. Probably could wait a little bit, but maybe not. I don't know. Maybe there's some sort of a surgical emergency. Any of these issues can come up and need need some attention right away.
Right. So good to have somebody that that you have vetted and that you both are willing to work with, so that person's available. And another thing that will come up, and I think we touched on it, but I really want to dive into this more, is you've talked about the fact that as a parent coordinator, you work with the parents on their communication, on being better able to discuss and resolve differences around co-parenting. But parent coordination goes a step further for those cases where parents are not able, after effort, after communication, after the help of their PC, if they are unable to reach agreement, many PC either agreements or orders from judges will allow the parent coordinator to make a recommendation. Isn't that correct?
Yes, they are. All of them can make recommendations. Some of the recommendations can be binding, and it's either given that authority by a court order or by the agreement that the parents sign.
And I think that's important. Yes, there is a big but. Go ahead.
The big but is that, it's never binding because I am not a judge, right? And the parent always has the opportunity or the ability to go back to have the matter heard before the judge.
Right.
I mean, judges are not thrilled because they've appointed a PC and or the parents have gone to a PC. So they're not thrilled when the matter comes back before the judge anyway, but that is always the parent's right to go litigate their issue.
It is always the right, but something to remember for everyone is you've now just spent all this time and money with a PC trying to work on the issue. The PC just doesn't walk in, listen to the two of you like a judge does, and then make a recommendation. The PC works with the two of you to help you together try to come to something. And really the recommendation is only if you cannot. And if it's an of the moment issue, the fact that then that recommendation gets taken to court to be litigated means that any benefit you had of having someone help you make a decision is usually lost, because now everything just goes back on hold, right?
Right.
Yeah. So if you are, I know a lot of judges. I've talked to a lot of judges over the years, and they have always said that they would much prefer parents come to decisions themselves, that the last thing a judge wants to do is make a major decision, or even minor ones, about other people's lives and other people's children. And I assume that's the same for a parent coordinator, that really the goal is more to help mom and dad, or mom and dad come to that decision.
Yes. I mean, the main goal is to teach people how to communicate better and how to work together as co-parents, to go from being spouses to being co-parents, and to, with the switch of that role, to how to learn how to make decisions. I mean, sometimes people divorce when their children are very young and they have 20 more years of working together as co-parents, right? And that's really hard to do when you don't like the other person, you don't trust the other person, you have a lot of anger and hurt and, a million other feelings. So the job of a parenting coordinator is to help you either work through or put aside or, compartmentalize those feelings and just focus on what's best for your child. And sometimes as PCs, we refer out. So we might say, maybe, a parenting skills class or a therapy class or an anger management class or therapy for the children to help them adjust to their new normal. And so putting a lot of supports in place to help the family transition from the old life to the new life. But the goal is to get everybody working towards a new normal, learning how to communicate in a new way, and to put ourselves out of work so that they no longer need us being involved in their lives and they can function making decisions without us.
And I think that's such a wonderful point for PCs, for parent coordinators, because I've heard others say the same thing. Really the goal is to get this family to the point where they don't need you on speed dial, or they don't need you available. And in the beginning, it can be sort of that speed dial sort of situation. Where we have very high levels of conflict for parents. I think you mentioned to me that you even at times will monitor communication for parents because they kind of get into that nasty gram back and forth sort of way of communicating. So when you are monitoring communication, tell us what that's like.
So, I have had clients that just sort of wanted to have a break from the back and forth or the, bickering, and they wanted me to monitor communication just for a bit as they adjusted and, each of them knew that I was there. So everybody was on their best behavior, and it was not intended to be a long-term solution, but just to give everybody a break as they got into a new routine. And, occasionally somebody would ask for my thoughts, or something would get heated and I'd say, let's take a break. And why don't we schedule a time to talk through this issue? For the most part, I think it was successful, because in this case, I'm thinking of phased out into a new norm where I'm not on every communication, but each of them know that if something gets heated or they need my help, they just put me back on the communication, and we go from there. But the goal is a progression to need me less and less.
Well, and that's, so it really depends on when they're starting with you as well, right? Because you mentioned some people may start working with you these days, even during the time of the divorce, where we have really high conflict. Parents are just, they can't even agree that it's Monday, let alone that they're going to, do something with their children, for their children, about their children. So starting that process during the divorce, I can see pluses to that. I can see minuses to that. And I'll tell you, one of the minuses is you probably have a lot of lawyers involved at that point.
I have, I think 3, if not more, cases right now where there is so much negotiation as to my agreement, my parent coordination agreement, whether I'll be binding or not binding, what percentage of my fee each client will pay. And there's a lot of back and forth between, the lawyers and myself. I've had a situation recently where one of the lawyers told me her client told her something that, something I told her, and she said, well, I thought this was part of your job. My client told me you wouldn't X, Y, or Z. And, her client had told her something that was clearly not true. And I thought, here I am, I'm parent coordinating the parents and now the lawyers, and it can get very complicated. But yes, more of my cases right now are pre-divorce. So they're involved heavily in litigation. And it is very complicated because I had a case where I was trying to get a bunch of agreements before a court date, and I had like 5 days, and we got a couple, right? But both parents are extremely resistant. I had asked each parent to give me a list of a couple schools that they could possibly compromise on, because the judge hasn't decided whether the child will stay in the right school in this school or move to a different school, because they're pre-divorce. And one parent said, no, I'm not going to do that because she's in the right school for her. So what am I going to do at this point? Their court date is that, and we may not be able to get a compromise on that issue. I'm going to try to work with her and explain to her that if the judge makes the decision and she has no second option, then, that may not be the right thing for the child. Like, she should want to take part in having a second option. She can still argue her case for the first option, but the father doesn't want her in that school. He's willing to come up with some second choices. So in that case, I'm getting it from the lawyers and from the parents, and we have these court dates pending. So there's some pressure to try to get an agreement on as many issues as possible so that at least they can make some progress before the judge.
Right. Well, and that's, it makes me think you are definitely doing parent coordination and lawyer coordination in those situations. But that's a very important factor for everyone, is that very often, I think, when parent coordination is going on during the litigation process, it will get bogged down, or it has an additional complication, because it's not just the parenting issues, that there's this overarching litigation mindset that is going on as well that can be difficult. And I think one of the benefits of working with you is you completely understand that framework, right? Having spent so much time in the family courts.
In this case, I was skimmed through the legal motions to get an idea of what was going on. And I can do that very, very quickly because I did it for so many years. But in this case, we're trying to figure out it's procedurally complicated, but I asked the lawyers, so what is happening on this? And I got 2 separate answers. So now they have to order the transcript because they couldn't agree on what happened in court, right? So even I'm understanding, but that I wasn't there, right? So
Right.
they're giving
Well,
me,
and they were, and they don't agree.
but like they're giving me different answers. So I'm trying to help my clients, their clients, they're giving me different answers. And even though I read all the paperwork, it was not clear. There were judge changes and anyway, so it got complicated, but it is helpful for me to be able to sort of digest the procedural history pretty quickly.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, having been involved in cases that have gotten complicated and worked with parent coordinators,
I did have to keep reminding myself, though, that I didn't have to read the legal parts of it. I don't need to know the case law. I don't need to know the exact sequential procedural history. So I kept saying, forget that. You don't need to read those sections. Just read like the affidavits.
Yeah.
So I have to every now and then remind myself of my role.
Not a lawyer. I'm the neutral parent coordinator. Right. And that's actually significant for people to remember, is that as a parent coordinator, you are neutral, right? You're coming in there. You don't represent or work with mom, even though you're a lawyer. You don't represent or work with other parents. You are there to support both parents in sort of that neutral fashion with an overarching desire to do what's in the best interest of the children.
Right. Right. It is an impartial role. There are times when one side's going to feel that I'm biased and the other side is going to feel that I'm biased. And that's just the way it's going to be.
Well, I'll tell you, I have had that conversation with clients, right? Because as an attorney, talking to clients about involving a parent coordinator in their case, it has often come up that, well, they think that a parent coordinator, much like they think a judge, is always going to agree with them. Like, sure, let's get a PC involved. My ex needs to hear from somebody else that they're wrong. And you always have to remember that anybody who's making a decision for you, anyone who's making a recommendation for you about these things, may not always agree with you. And that's something you have to be prepared for if you're going to work with the parent coordinator. It's true. It's a part of the process. So, well, we have a ton more to dive into on this complicated topic. That's why we decided to make this a special two-parter. So you're coming back on Thursday and we're going to dive a little deeper into, what a parent coordinator will do and where a parent coordinator won't go, what's beyond the scope of a parent coordinator. So we'll get into a lot of that, but in the meantime, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you, Carolyn, for both parent coordination services or information, as well as your mediation services?
So for parenting coordination, my website is carolynkalos.com, fairly simple. And my mediation website is familyfriendlymediation.com. So either way. And I am on social media as well, not like as effectively and amazingly as you are, but I try.
Well, you've been doing a great job on Instagram. I know it's at Family Friendly Mediation. So go follow Carolyn. She has a lot of great tips and advice and information for people in her feed. And I'll put links to all of Carolyn's websites and information, her bio and all in the show notes. And we'll see you all again on Thursday. Thanks, Carolyn.
Thank you, Susan.